Catherine Foster's heart raced as she peered out the stage coach window, her white-knuckled grip on her small leather satchel betraying the fear that coursed through her veins. The Texas landscape stretched before her, vast and unknown, so different from the manicured gardens of Boston where she had spent the past 22 years of her life. It was 1875, and she had just made the most dangerous decision of her life, fleeing from the man her father had promised her to. A wealthy businessman 3 decades her senior with cold eyes and crueler intentions. First time in Bandera, miss. The elderly woman sitting across from her smiled kindly, her face a web of wrinkles that spoke of years under the Texas sun. Catherine nodded, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes, madam, I'm visiting family." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. In truth, she had no family in Texas. No family anywhere who would help her now. Her mother had died 5 years prior, and her father had arranged her marriage to settle a business debt, her future traded away like a commodity. When she discovered the truth about her intended's treatment of his first wife, Catherine had made her decision. With only the money she had secretly saved and a few cherished possessions, she had boarded a train west, determined to forge her own path. The stagecoach jolted as it hit a rut in the road, snapping Catherine back to the present. The sun-baked town of Bandera came into view, a dusty collection of wooden buildings that seemed to rise from the earth like weathered monuments to human determination. The San Antonio River glinted in the distance, a silver ribbon cutting through the rugged landscape. "Bandera, folks," the driver called out. "County seat of Bandera County. We'll be stopping here for an hour before continuing on to Careville." But Catherine wouldn't be continuing on. This remote outpost in the Texas Hill Country was where she would disappear, where a leaner Catherine Foster would cease to exist, and simply Catherine, or Kathy, as she would now call herself, would begin anew. As the stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the town's modest hotel, Catherine gathered her courage along with her belongings. The other passengers filed out, and she followed, stepping down onto the dusty street, the Texas heat immediately enveloping her despite the late September air. "Need help with your luggage, miss?" a deep voice inquired. Catherine turned to find a tall man regarding her with curious eyes. He wore a worn cowboy hat pulled low over his brow, but she could still see his striking features, strong jawline covered with stubble, and eyes the color of the Texas sky. His clothes were practical, dusty from the trail, but well kept. "I can manage, thank you," she replied, clutching her single bag closer. "Suit yourself," he said with a slight nod before turning to the stagecoach driver. "Any mail for the Quinn Ranch, Pete?" "Just this, Zach," the driver replied, handing over a small bundle tied with string. "Your pa expecting anything important?" "Always is according to him," the man Zach replied with a good-natured laugh. Catherine took advantage of their conversation to slip away toward the hotel. She had little money and needed to find work quickly. The weight of her decision pressed upon her shoulders, but the alternative, a life sentenced to misery with Harold Whitcomb, was unthinkable. The hotel lobby was modest but clean, with a middle-aged woman behind the counter who looked up as Catherine entered. "Room for the night, dear?" she asked, her keen eyes taking in Catherine's travel-worn appearance. "Yes, please," Catherine replied, "and I was wondering, are there any positions available in town, for work, I mean?" The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. "On your own, are you?" When Catherine nodded, she continued, "Well, Mrs. Miller at the diner might need help, and the schoolteacher's been looking for an assistant. Can you read and write?" "Yes, madam. I'm well educated," Catherine replied, feeling a flicker of hope. "I'm Martha Dawson." "My husband and I run this hotel," the woman said, pushing the register toward Catherine. Catherine hesitated before signing her name, just Catherine F., deliberately smudging the ink to obscure her identity. If her father sent men looking for her, she wouldn't make it easy for them. Room 4, top of the stairs to the left, Mrs. Dawson said, handing over a key. Dinner's at 6 in the dining room. Don't be late. Cook's strict about his schedule. Thank you, Mrs. Dawson, Catherine replied, grateful for the woman's businesslike manner that asked no uncomfortable questions. As she climbed the stairs to her room, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. The past 3 days had been a blur of fear and determination, constantly looking over her shoulder. Now, in this dusty Texas town, she would have to build a life from nothing. Her room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and window overlooking the main street. Catherine set down her bag and moved to the window, watching as townsfolk went about their business. Her gaze caught on the cowboy from earlier, Zach, as he mounted a magnificent chestnut horse. There was something about the easy way he moved, the confident set of his shoulders, that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up toward her window. Catherine stepped back quickly, her heart racing inexplicably. She had not come to Bandera looking for attention, especially not from a man. Freedom was what she sought, the freedom to determine her own fate. But as she washed the travel dust from her face and prepared to face her new reality, Catherine couldn't help but wonder about the cowboy with the sky-blue eyes. In this strange new world, she would need allies. Little did she know that Zachary Quinn would become far more than that. The next morning, Catherine rose with the sun, determined to secure employment before her meager savings dwindled further. She dressed in her simplest gown, a practical navy blue that wouldn't show dirt easily, and pinned her honey-brown hair into a modest bun. The looking-glass reflected a young woman with determined green eyes and a sprinkling of freckles across her nose that her mother had always lamented. After a simple breakfast in the hotel dining room, Catherine set out to find the schoolhouse. The town was already bustling despite the early hour, with shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts and ranch hands leading horses to the livery stable. The air smelled of dust, horse, and the promise of another scorching day. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a white-painted building with a small bell tower. As Catherine approached, she heard children's voices raised in a multiplication table recitation. She hesitated at the door, smoothing her skirts nervously before knocking. The recitation stopped abruptly, and moments later, the door opened to reveal a harried-looking woman in her 30s, spectacles perched on her nose. "Yes," she inquired, adjusting her spectacles as she surveyed Catherine. "Good morning," Catherine replied, summoning her most polite smile. "I'm Catherine. Mrs. Dawson at the hotel mentioned you might be in need of an assistant." The woman's expression brightened immediately. "Indeed I am. I'm Miss Abigail Parker. Please come in." She turned to the classroom of approximately 20 children of various ages. "Children, continue with your sums. I'll be speaking with this lady for a moment." She led Catherine to a corner of the room. "You've arrived like an answer to prayer, miss." "Just Catherine, please," she replied, avoiding giving her surname. Miss Parker nodded, not pressing the issue. "I have 23 students from 6 to 16 years of age, and I'm attempting to teach them all simultaneously. It's challenging." "I would imagine so," Catherine said with genuine sympathy. "I've had experience tutoring children in Boston. I'm well versed in literature, mathematics, history, and I can teach basic Latin." Miss Parker's eyes widened. "Latin? My goodness, you're certainly qualified. When could you start?" "Immediately," Catherine replied, relief flooding through her. "Wonderful. The position pays $8 per week. Not generous, I'm afraid, but the town's resources are limited." It was less than Catherine had hoped, but it would cover her room and board with a little left over. "That will be fine, Miss Parker." As they discussed the details of her employment, the schoolhouse door burst open, and a young boy of about 10 rushed in, his clothes rumpled and his dark hair standing on end. "Sorry I'm late, Miss Parker. Pa's horse got loose and I had to help catch him," the boy explained breathlessly. "This is the third time this week, Thomas Quinn," Miss Parker said sternly, though her eyes held a hint of amusement. "Take your seat, and you'll be helping Miss Catherine after school with organizing the bookshelves as penance." The boy nodded solemnly before casting a curious glance at Catherine. As he passed to take his seat, he whispered, "Are you really going to be our new teacher?" "Assistant teacher," Catherine corrected with a smile. Thomas grinned, revealing a missing front tooth. "My Uncle Zach says we need more pretty ladies in Bandera." Catherine felt her cheeks warm as Miss Parker shooed the boy to his desk. "Thomas is our resident mischief maker," she explained, "but he's bright when he applies himself. His uncle Zachary Quinn runs one of the largest cattle ranches in the county with his father." The name triggered immediate recognition. The cowboy from the stage coach, those blue eyes, and that confident stance suddenly had a fuller identity. "I believe I met him briefly yesterday," Catherine said, trying to sound casual. "Zachary's well respected around these parts," Miss Parker continued. "A bit of a loner since he came back from the war, but he has a good heart. His brother Thomas's father died 2 years ago, and Zach's been helping his sister-in-law keep the ranch going." Before Catherine could respond, a commotion from the students demanded Miss Parker's attention. The rest of the morning passed in a flurry of activity as Catherine was introduced to the children and began helping with lessons. The work was engaging, the children mostly eager to learn, and for the first time since fleeing Boston, Catherine felt a sense of purpose. At midday, the children were released for lunch, and Catherine found herself walking back toward the hotel, her mind spinning with the morning's events. She had secured employment, taken the first step toward building a new life. Yet the nagging fear remained: what if her father's men tracked her to Bandera? Harold Whitcomb was not a man who would easily accept being denied what he considered his due. Lost in her thoughts, Catherine didn't notice the rider approaching until he called out her name. "Miss Catherine." She looked up to see Zachary Quinn atop his chestnut horse, his broad-shouldered silhouette outlined against the clear Texas sky. He tipped his hat in greeting as he reined his horse to a stop beside her. "Thomas tells me you're our new schoolteacher," he said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Assistant teacher," she corrected, feeling unaccountably flustered under his direct gaze. "Your nephew is quite spirited." Zach laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "That's a kind way of putting it. His pa was the same at that age." A shadow crossed his features at the mention of his brother, but he quickly masked it. "Miss Parker's been needing help for some time now. Town's growing faster than we can keep up with." Catherine nodded, uncertain how to continue the conversation. There was something disarming about Zachary Quinn's straightforward manner. "You planning to stay in Bandera long?" he asked, shifting in his saddle. "Yes," she replied simply, unwilling to elaborate. He seemed to sense her reticence and didn't press further. "Well, the Founders' Day dance is coming up next weekend. Whole town turns out for it. Good way to meet folks if you're staying on." "I'm not much for dancing," Catherine replied, the lie coming easily. In truth, she had attended countless society balls in Boston, but those memories belonged to a life she was leaving behind. "That's a shame," Zach said, his blue eyes twinkling. "But it's still worth coming for Mrs. Henderson's apple pie alone." Despite herself, Catherine smiled. "I'll consider it." "Good," he replied, gathering his reins. "Welcome to Bandera, Miss Catherine." With another tip of his hat, he urged his horse forward, leaving Catherine staring after him. She couldn't afford distractions, especially not in the form of a handsome cowboy with kind eyes. Her priority had to be establishing herself, creating a life safe from the reach of her father and Harold Whitcomb. Yet as she continued toward the hotel, Catherine found herself wondering if she would indeed attend the Founders' Day dance. For the first time in months, the thought of the future held a glimmer of something besides fear. The week passed in a blur of new routines and faces. Catherine quickly settled into her role at the school, finding genuine satisfaction in helping the children learn. Miss Parker proved to be a kind mentor, never pressing for details about Catherine's past, accepting her reticence with the understanding that many who came west did so to leave something behind. Catherine had taken a small room above the milliner's shop, more affordable than the hotel, and offering a modicum of privacy. The owner, Mrs. Jenkins, was a widow who appreciated having someone else in the building at night and charged less rent in exchange for Catherine helping close the shop in the evenings. By Friday afternoon, as she released the children for the weekend with reminders about their reading assignments, Catherine felt a tentative sense of belonging beginning to take root. It was a foreign sensation after months of planning her escape, of looking over her shoulder, of dreading the future. "Miss Catherine," Thomas Quinn called out as the children scattered into the afternoon sunshine, "are you coming to the dance tomorrow? Uncle Zach says you have to, or you'll never really be part of Bandera." Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks, aware of Miss Parker's curious gaze. "Did he now?" Thomas nodded vigorously. "He says it's a tradition. Everyone has to go to at least one Founder's Day dance when they come to town." "Well, if it's tradition," Catherine said with a small smile, unable to crush the boy's enthusiasm. "Great, I'll tell him," Thomas replied, already dashing away before she could clarify that she hadn't actually committed to attending. "The boy's right, you know," Miss Parker said as they began tidying the classroom. "The dance is quite the event. The entire county turns out for it." "I don't have anything suitable to wear," Catherine admitted, gesturing to her simple work dress. Miss Parker regarded her thoughtfully. "Mrs. Jenkins might have something, and I have a blue ribbon that would complement your coloring beautifully." The genuine kindness in the gesture brought unexpected tears to Catherine's eyes. "Thank you," she managed, turning away to hide her emotion. "We all had our first Bandera dance," Miss Parker said gently. "It's simply part of becoming one of us." Later that evening, as Catherine helped Mrs. Jenkins close the shop, she found the courage to inquire about a dress for the dance. The older woman's face lit up with delight. "I've been hoping you'd ask. I have just the thing," she exclaimed, leading Catherine to the back room where several dresses hung waiting for customers who had ordered them. She pulled out a dress in a shade of green that reminded Catherine of spring leaves. This was commissioned by Mrs. Collins over in Careville, but she's decided on another style. It should fit you with minimal alterations. The dress was simpler than what Catherine had worn to Boston society events, but far lovelier than anything she had brought with her. The bodice was modestly cut, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs, and the skirt fell in elegant folds that would move beautifully during a dance. "I couldn't possibly," Catherine began, but Mrs. Jenkins waved away her protest. "Consider it a welcome gift," she insisted. "Every young woman deserves a pretty dress for a dance." That night, as Catherine made the few necessary alterations to the gown by lamplight, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of excitement. Tomorrow's dance represented something she had never truly experienced in Boston, a community gathering where people came together not for status or business connections, but simply for the joy of celebration. As she worked, her mind drifted to Zachary Quinn and his invitation. She had seen him several times throughout the week, always from a distance riding through town on ranch business, helping an elderly man load supplies into a wagon, once carrying Thomas on his shoulders as they left the general store. There was something about him that drew her gaze, a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from his very being. It was foolish to think of him in such a way, Catherine scolded herself. She had fled one marriage only weeks ago. The last thing she needed was to develop feelings for a man she barely knew, no matter how kind his eyes or how genuine his smile. Still, as she finally laid aside her sewing and extinguished the lamp, Catherine found herself looking forward to the dance with an anticipation she hadn't felt in years. Saturday dawned clear and bright. the autumn air crisp with the promise of an eventual end to the relentless Texas heat. Catherine spent the morning helping Mrs. Jenkins in the shop, which was busier than usual with last-minute purchases for the dance. By mid-afternoon, she retreated upstairs to prepare, taking extra care with her appearance for the first time since leaving Boston. She washed her hair and let it dry in the sunlight streaming through her small window, the honey-brown locks taking on golden highlights. Miss Parker arrived as promised with the blue ribbon, which Catherine wove through her hair after arranging it in a style more elegant than her usual practical bun. The green dress fit as if made for her, the color bringing out the deeper emerald of her eyes. As she surveyed her reflection in the small looking-glass, Catherine barely recognized herself. The frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach a week ago seemed to have been replaced by someone with a hint of confidence in her gaze, a touch of color in her cheeks that had nothing to do with cosmetics. "You look lovely," Mrs. Jenkins declared as Catherine descended the stairs. "Every eligible bachelor in the county will be seeking an introduction," Catherine laughed nervously. "I'm not looking for that kind of attention." Mrs. Jenkins gave her a knowing look but didn't press the issue. "The dance is being held in the barn at the edge of town. My nephew will escort us there shortly." The barn turned out to be a spacious structure that had been transformed for the occasion. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm golden glow over the proceedings. Hay bales covered with quilts provided seating around the perimeter, and a small band of local musicians was setting up in one corner. Tables laden with food and drink lined one wall, including, Catherine noted with amusement, what must be Mrs. Henderson's famous apple pies. The gathering was already in full swing when they arrived, with what seemed like the entire population of Bandera County in attendance. Children darted between adults, women gossiped in clusters, and men stood in groups discussing cattle prices and weather predictions. The atmosphere was jovial, a stark contrast to the rigid formality of Boston society events. "Catherine, you came." Miss Parker greeted her warmly, resplendent in a blue dress that matched her ribbon in Catherine's hair. "Come, let me introduce you to everyone." What followed was a whirlwind of names and faces: the mayor and his wife, the blacksmith and his numerous children, ranchers and their families from the surrounding countryside. Catherine smiled and nodded, trying to commit names to memory, aware of curious glances and whispered speculations about the new schoolteacher's assistant from back east. She was just accepting a glass of lemonade when she felt a presence behind her. Before turning, she knew who it would be, some sixth sense alerting her to his proximity. "Miss Catherine," Zachary Quinn's deep voice confirmed her intuition. "I wasn't sure you'd come." She turned to find him looking more handsome than should be legal, dressed in clean black trousers and a crisp white shirt, his usually unruly dark hair tamed for the occasion. His blue eyes crinkled with warmth as they met hers. "Your nephew made a convincing case about tradition," she replied, aiming for lightness despite the sudden quickening of her pulse. "Thomas tends to be persuasive when he sets his mind to something," Zach agreed with a chuckle. "The Quinn family trait. Is that so?" Catherine found herself smiling back, drawn into the easy banter. "Absolutely. How else do you think we convinced the prettiest new lady in town to attend our humble gathering?" The compliment was delivered with such casual sincerity that Catherine couldn't even pretend to be offended. "I believe Mrs. Henderson's apple pie was mentioned as an incentive," she replied. "Ah, yes. Have you tried it yet? If not, I consider it my solemn duty to remedy that immediately." He offered his arm with an exaggerated formality that made Catherine laugh. Against her better judgment, she placed her hand on his arm, allowing him to guide her toward the refreshment tables. The simple contact sent an unexpected warmth spreading through her, and she was grateful for the dim lighting that hid her flushed cheeks. As they navigated through the crowd, Catherine noticed the curious glances and approving nods from the townsfolk. Clearly, Zachary Quinn was well regarded in Bandera, and her association with him was being noted. "Everyone's staring," she murmured, suddenly self-conscious. "Not at me," Zach replied quietly. "You're a vision in that green dress, Catherine, like spring come early to Bandera." The sincerity in his voice stole her breath for a moment. Before she could formulate a response, the band struck up a lively tune and couples began moving to the center of the barn for a reel. "Would you do me the honor?" Zach asked, turning to face her with a slight bow. Catherine hesitated. Dancing with him would only fuel the town's gossip, and worse, the dangerous attraction she already felt toward him. Yet the music called to her, as did the genuine invitation in his eyes. "I thought you told Thomas you weren't much for dancing," he added with a knowing twinkle in his eye. Caught in her small deception, Catherine couldn't help but laugh. "I may have misrepresented my dancing abilities slightly." "I suspected as much," he replied, taking her hand and leading her to join the other dancers. Boston debutantes generally know their way around a ballroom. Catherine froze, her hand tightening reflexively on his. "What makes you think I was a debutante?" "The way you hold yourself, the way you speak," Zach replied, his expression growing serious. "Don't worry, Catherine. Your secrets are safe in Bandera. Most of us came here to start fresh for one reason or another." The simple acceptance in his words loosened something tight in Catherine's chest. He wasn't demanding explanations or pressing for details, just offering understanding. Before she could respond, they were swept into the dance, the lively music making conversation impossible. Zach proved to be an excellent dancer, guiding her through the steps with confidence and grace that belied his rugged cowboy exterior. Catherine found herself laughing as they twirled and stepped in time with the music, the joy of movement temporarily banishing her worries. As the evening progressed, Catherine danced not only with Zach, but with several other men from the community, the young blacksmith's apprentice. The mayor, even Thomas, insisted on a turn around the floor, his small face solemn with concentration as he carefully avoided stepping on her toes. But it was Zach she found her gaze returning to, even when dancing with others. He moved through the gathering with easy confidence, chatting with the elderly, teasing the children, discussing serious matters with the other ranchers. Yet his eyes seemed to find her just as frequently, a silent connection maintained across the crowded barn. When the band shifted to a slower waltz, he appeared at her side as if conjured by her thoughts. "One more dance?" he asked softly. Catherine knew she should decline. Getting too close to anyone in Bandera was dangerous not just for her heart, but for her safety. Yet she found herself nodding, allowing him to lead her onto the floor and take her in his arms with a proper distance between them that nevertheless felt intimately close. "You're settling in well," he observed as they moved to the gentle rhythm. "The children adore you already. Thomas talks of nothing else, but Miss Catherine said this and Miss Catherine showed us that." "They're wonderful children," she replied, genuinely touched. "Teaching them has been a joy." "Bandera's a good place," Zach said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Good people who look after their own." The implication was clear: if she stayed, if she became one of them, she would be protected. The offer was tempting, more so because it came from him. "I'm beginning to see that," Catherine admitted softly. As they circled the floor, Catherine caught snippets of conversation from those watching speculation about Zachary Quinn finally finding himself a lady, an Eastern girl with secrets in her eyes. The gossiping voices reminded her sharply of Boston society, of how quickly one could become the subject of wagging tongues. Zach must have felt her stiffen, for he drew back slightly to look into her face. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "Small towns run on gossip, but there's rarely malice in it." "I'm not used to being the center of attention," she replied, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. In truth, As the daughter of one of Boston's wealthiest merchants, she had often been the focus of social scrutiny. "I find that hard to believe," Zach said with a small smile that suggested he saw through her deception but wouldn't call her on it. "But if it makes you uncomfortable, perhaps we should give them something else to talk about." Before she could ask what he meant, the music ended and Zach led her toward the open barn doors. "Come on," he said, his eyes alight with mischief. "I want to show you something." Outside, the night was alive with stars, more than Catherine had ever seen in the city. The air was cooler now, and she shivered slightly in her fine dress. Without comment, Zach removed his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. The warmth of it and his lingering scent of leather, soap, and something uniquely him enveloped her immediately. "Thank you," she murmured, drawing it closer around her. "This way," he said, guiding her away from the barn toward a small rise where a massive oak tree stood silhouetted against the starlit sky. Best view in Bandera County, especially on a clear night like this. As they reached the tree, Catherine gasped softly. From this vantage point, the entire valley spread before them, the town's scattered lights twinkling below, the vast expanse of ranch land stretching to the horizon, and above it all, the magnificent canopy of stars. "It's breathtaking," she whispered, afraid to break the spell of the moment with too loud a voice. "This is why I never could leave, even when I had the chance," Zach said, his voice equally soft as he gazed out over the land. "After the war, I thought about heading further west, California maybe. But this," he gestured to the vista before them, "this is freedom to me. Open sky, land as far as you can see, the right to build something with your own hands." His words struck a chord deep within Catherine. Freedom. Wasn't that what she had fled Boston seeking? Not just escape from Harold Whitcomb, but the liberty to determine her own path. "I understand," she said simply, and knew from the way Zach's gaze shifted to her face that he believed her. They stood in companionable silence for several minutes, the distant sounds of the dance providing a gentle backdrop to the night's natural symphony of crickets and rustling leaves. "Catherine," Zach finally said, turning to face her fully, "I know you're running from something or someone. I won't ask what or who, but I want you to know that if you ever need help, you only have to ask." The sincerity in his voice brought unexpected tears to Catherine's eyes. She blinked them away, unwilling to show such vulnerability. "Why would you help someone you barely know?" "Because in the week you've been here, I've seen how you are with the children. How you helped old Mrs. Bennett when she dropped her packages outside the general store. How you really listen when people speak to you." He paused, a rueful smile touching his lips. "And maybe because from the moment you stepped down from that stagecoach, I haven't been able to get you out of my mind." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Catherine found herself unable to look away from his eyes, the intensity there matching something awakening inside her own heart. "Zach," she began, uncertain what she even wanted to say. A shout from the direction of the barn shattered the moment. "Uncle Zach, Miss Catherine, where are you?" "They're cutting the cake." Thomas's voice carried clearly in the night air, and Zach stepped back with a soft laugh. "Saved by the cake," he said, though whether he meant she was saved from responding to his confession, or he was saved from her potential rejection, Catherine wasn't sure. "We should go back," she said, reluctantly shrugging off his jacket and handing it to him. "People will talk." "Let them," Zach replied with a shrug as he donned his jacket again. "But you're right, we shouldn't miss Mrs. Henderson's cake. It's almost as famous as her pie." As they walked back toward the light and music of the barn, Catherine was acutely aware of having reached a crossroads. Zachary Quinn represented everything she shouldn't want: attachment, visibility, the risk of discovery. Yet he also embodied what she had fled Boston to find: honesty, freedom, the chance to be valued for herself rather than her family's wealth or social position. The question was whether she was brave enough to seize the opportunity. knowing the dangers that still pursued her. For tonight, at least, she would allow herself to enjoy the warmth of his company, the magic of the dance, and the simple pleasure of belonging, however briefly, to the community of Bandera. October slipped into November, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color to the Texas Hill Country. Catherine settled further into her life in Bandera, her days filled with teaching, and her evenings often spent in the company of the friends. She was slowly making Miss Parker, Mrs. Jenkins, and increasingly, Zachary Quinn. Since the Founder's Day dance, Zach had found numerous reasons to visit town, checking on his nephew at school, delivering fresh beef to the hotel, attending Sunday services at the small church where Catherine now sang in the choir. Each time, he sought her out, sometimes for just a brief exchange of pleasantries, other times for longer conversations as he walked her home from school or church. The townsfolk noticed, of course. Catherine caught the knowing smiles, the whispered comments, the approving nods from the matrons of Bandera. In a small community where everyone's business was communal property, the developing relationship between the new schoolteacher's assistant and the respected rancher was prime fodder for gentle gossip. Catherine found herself looking forward to Zach's visits with an anticipation that both thrilled and terrified her. He never pressed her about her past, respecting the boundaries she maintained, but his steady presence and unwavering kindness were slowly breaking down the walls she had built around her heart. It was on a crisp Saturday in mid-November when everything changed. Catherine had been in Bandera for nearly 2 months, long enough that she had begun to relax her vigilance, to believe that perhaps she had truly escaped her former life. She was helping Mrs. Jenkins inventory new fabric arrivals when the shop bell jingled. Looking up with a welcoming smile that quickly froze on her face, Catherine found herself staring at a tall, well-dressed man whose expensive suit and leather gloves marked him as distinctly not from Bandera. "Good day, ladies," he said, his cultured Eastern accent confirming Catherine's worst fears. "I'm looking for information about a young woman who may have passed through here recently. Alina Catherine Foster. She would have arrived in late September or early October." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face, grateful that she was partially concealed behind a bolt of fabric. The man was not her father or Harold Whitcomb, but she recognized him as one of her father's business associates, Mr. James Harrington, who had always treated her with polite indifference at social gatherings. Mrs. Jenkins, bless her, didn't so much as glance in Catherine's direction. "Don't recall anyone by that name," she said calmly. "We don't get many travelers through here except those passing through on the stagecoach." Mr. Harrington produced a small photograph, Catherine's official portrait from her 20th birthday, and held it out. "She looks like this." Very distinctive green eyes. Mrs. Jenkins studied the photograph with an excellent show of concentration before shaking her head. "No, can't say I've seen her. Pretty girl, though. Is she in some kind of trouble?" "Not at all," Mr. Harrington replied smoothly. "She's a young woman of considerable means who has made an impetuous decision her family is most concerned about. There's a substantial reward for information leading to her safe return to Boston." Catherine's hands trembled so badly she had to set down the fabric she was holding. They had found her. Not directly yet, but they were close. Her father must have sent agents to every town along the stagecoach routes heading west. It was only a matter of time before someone recognized her photograph. "Well, if I hear anything, I'll be sure to let the sheriff know, Mrs. Jenkins said, walking toward the door in a clear indication that the conversation was concluded. "Good day to you, sir." After Mr. Harrington left, Mrs. Jenkins turned to Catherine with concern etched on her kind face. "Alina Catherine Foster, is it?" Catherine nodded mutely, fear clenching her throat. "I suspected you were running from something," the older woman said gently. You have the look I've seen in other women's eyes, those escaping bad situations. I need to leave, Catherine whispered, her mind already racing ahead to how quickly she could gather her meager possessions and be on the next stage coach out of town. Nonsense, Mrs. Jenkins replied firmly. That man will be checking every stagecoach and train station for miles. Running now would only confirm you're here. But if someone recognizes me from the photograph, then we'll deal with it, Mrs. Jenkins cut her off. Bandera takes care of its own, Catherine, and like it or not, you've become one of us. Tears welled in Catherine's eyes at the simple acceptance in the woman's words. I can't ask you to lie for me. You didn't ask. I offered, Mrs. Jenkins replied with a small smile. Now, finish sorting that calico while I go speak with Sheriff Taylor. He should know there's a stranger asking questions. After Mrs. Jenkins left, Catherine tried to focus on the work at hand, but her thoughts were a chaotic whirl of fear and uncertainty. She had begun to build a life here, to care for the people of this small Texas town. The thought of leaving crushed something tender that had just begun to bloom within her. And Zach, what of him? The connection growing between them was something Catherine had never experienced before, honest, uncomplicated by social expectations or financial considerations. Just two people drawing together like compass needles finding true north. The shop bell jingled again, and Catherine looked up sharply, expecting Mrs. Jenkins' return. Instead, Zachary Quinn filled the doorway, his tall frame blocking the afternoon sunlight, his expression uncharacteristically serious. Catherine, he said simply. Mrs. Jenkins found me at the livery. She told me what happened. Catherine's composure finally cracked. A sob escaped her as Zach crossed the room in 3 long strides, gathering her into his arms without hesitation. She stiffened momentarily before surrendering to the comfort he offered, her face pressed against his chest, his steady heartbeat a reassuring rhythm beneath her cheek. It's all right, he murmured, one hand coming up to stroke her hair gently. You're safe. No, she managed between shaky breaths. I'm not. None of you are if you help me. My father will stop at nothing to bring me back. Zach drew back slightly to look into her face, his blue eyes intense. Why, Catherine? What is it you're running from? The question she had been dreading. Yet in this moment, with fear stripping away her defenses, Catherine found she wanted him to know the truth. All of it. An arranged marriage, she said, her voice steadying as she forced herself to meet his gaze. My father promised me to a business associate to settle a debt. Harold Whitcomb, a man 30 years my senior with a reputation for cruelty. His first wife died under suspicious circumstances. Understanding dawned in Zach's eyes, followed swiftly by anger. And your father would force you into such a marriage. My father sees me as a commodity to be traded, Catherine replied bitterly. After my mother died, there was no one to protect me from his business decisions, and that's all I was to him. A business decision. Zach's arms tightened around her protectively. No wonder you ran. I tried reasoning with him, pleading. Nothing worked, Catherine continued, the words pouring out now that she had begun. When I learned what happened to Whitcomb's first wife, how he had systematically isolated and abused her until her death, I knew I couldn't let that be my fate. So I took the money I had secretly saved and fled west. I thought if I got far enough away, they wouldn't find me. And now they have, Zach said grimly. Not yet, Catherine replied. Mr. Harrington didn't recognize me, but it's only a matter of time before someone connects a leaner Catherine Foster with the new schoolteacher's assistant. Zach was silent for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. When he spoke, his voice was decisive. Come to the ranch. What? The Quinn Ranch is 10 miles outside of town. Remote, defensible, and no one goes there without an invitation, Zach explained. You'll be safer there than in town where this Harrington fellow can ask questions. The offer was tempting, but Catherine shook her head. I can't impose on your family that way. It's not an imposition, Zach insisted. My father would be the first to offer once he heard your story, and Sarah, my sister-in-law, has been wanting female company since my brother died. But the school, Miss Parker managed before you came. She can manage for a week or two until we figure out a more permanent solution, Zach replied, his tone brooking no argument. Catherine studied his face, seeing the determination there alongside something deeper, something that made her heart beat faster despite her fear. Why are you doing this, Zach? Why risk helping me? His expression softened, and one hand came up to gently tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Because I've spent the last 2 months getting to know a woman of extraordinary courage and kindness. Because I've watched you build a life here with nothing but determination and grit. And because... He paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Because I'm falling in love with you, Catherine Foster. And I'll be damned if I let anyone take you back to a life that would destroy everything that makes you who you are. The declaration hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned like everything about Zachary Quinn. Catherine stared up at him, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Zach, she began, uncertain what to say in the face of such raw emotion. You don't have to say anything, he interrupted gently. I know it's too soon, and you have more important things to worry about right now, but I wanted you to know where I stand, why I'm offering help. The simplicity of his declaration, free from the manipulations and calculations that had characterized her relationships in Boston, touched Catherine deeply. This was what freedom meant, she realized. The ability to choose based on the truth of one's heart rather than external pressures. Thank you, she whispered, the words inadequate but heartfelt. The shop bell jingled again as Mrs. Jenkins returned, accompanied by Sheriff Taylor, a weather-beaten man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He nodded respectfully to Catherine. Miss Foster, he said, deliberately using her real name. Mrs. Jenkins has informed me of your situation. I want you to know that in Bandera County, we don't take kindly to men forcing women into unwanted marriages. Relief washed over Catherine at the simple acceptance in his tone. Thank you, Sheriff. That said, your father's man is staying at the hotel and asking questions all over town. It's only a matter of time before someone makes the connection, especially once he starts showing that photograph around more widely. I've offered to take Catherine to the ranch, Zach interjected. Keep her out of sight until we can determine our next steps. Sheriff Taylor nodded approvingly. Good thinking, Quinn. I'll do what I can to misdirect this Harrington fellow. Tell him we had reports of a young woman matching the description heading further west toward El Paso. The three of them, Zach, Mrs. Jenkins, and Sheriff Taylor, continued discussing strategies, but Catherine's mind had already leaped ahead to the implications of what was happening. These people, virtual strangers just months ago, were risking their reputations and possibly more to help her. And Zach, his declaration echoed in her mind, falling in love with her. The realization that she felt the same way struck with the force of revelation. Despite her best efforts to guard her heart, she had fallen in love with Zachary Quinn, his integrity, his quiet strength, his fundamental understanding of what freedom truly meant. But love didn't change the reality of her situation. Her father's wealth and influence extended far, and Harold Whitcomb was not a man who would easily accept being denied. As long as they pursued her, Catherine would be putting everyone in Bandera at risk, especially Zach. The question was whether her newfound freedom was worth the cost to those who had shown her such kindness, and whether the fragile love blossoming between her and Zach was strong enough to withstand the storm gathering on the horizon. Within an hour of Sheriff Taylor's departure, Catherine found herself riding beside Zachary Quinn on the road leading out of Bandera. Mrs. Jenkins had helped her pack her few belongings, and Miss Parker, hastily summoned to the shop, had assured her that the school could manage without her temporarily. The speed with which the plan came together left Catherine breathless, swept along by the decisive actions of people determined to protect her. Zack had brought his wagon rather than horses, allowing Catherine to sit beside him for the journey. They traveled in companionable silence for the first few miles, each lost in their own thoughts as the town receded behind them, and the vast expanse of the Texas Hill Country opened before them. "It's beautiful," Catherine finally said, gazing at the rolling landscape painted in autumn hues of gold and russet. "I never imagined Texas would look like this." "Most Easterners expect desert and cactus," Zack replied with a small smile, "but the hill country has its own kind of beauty. Not as dramatic as the mountains or as lush as the forests back east, but it feels free," Catherine finished for him, understanding instinctively what he meant. The open spaces, the distant horizons, the sense of possibility that seemed to hover in the very air. Zack glanced at her, appreciation warming his gaze. "Exactly." As they traveled, he pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the land which creeks never ran dry, even in the worst droughts, which hills had the best wildflower displays in spring, where his grandfather had first settled when coming to Texas after the Mexican War. Catherine listened, absorbing this history that was becoming increasingly important to her. "What will your family think of your bringing home a fugitive?" she asked as they forded a shallow stream, the wagon wheels splashing water that glinted in the afternoon sunlight. "My father will be delighted to have another person to regale with his stories of the early days," Zack replied with a chuckle. "And Sarah has been after me to bring a nice girl home for months now, though I suspect this isn't quite what she had in mind." Catherine smiled despite her anxiety. "And what did you have in mind, Zachary Quinn, when you decided to bring me to your ranch?" The question was bolder than she would normally have dared, but the events of the day had shifted something between them. His declaration of love still hung in the air, acknowledged but not yet fully addressed. Zack was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the reins as he guided the horses up a slight incline. "I wanted to keep you safe," he finally said. "But I also wanted you to see this place that means everything to me, to understand why I never could leave it, even when staying meant working alongside my father when we don't always see eye to eye." The honesty in his voice touched Catherine deeply. In Boston society, men rarely spoke so plainly about their feelings or motivations. Everything was veiled in social niceties and strategic conversational maneuvers. Zack's straightforward nature was refreshing and increasingly precious to her. "And your father?" she asked. "Will he approve of your helping me?" "My father believes in doing what's right, even when it's difficult," Zack replied confidently. "Once he hears your story, he'll be the first to insist you stay as long as necessary." As they crested the hill, the Quinn Ranch came into view, a sprawling complex of buildings nestled in a picturesque valley. The main house was larger than Catherine had expected, a two-story structure built of local limestone with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Nearby stood a substantial barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings, all well maintained. Beyond, pastures stretched toward distant hills, dotted with the dark shapes of cattle. "It's beautiful," Catherine murmured, taking in the scene that spoke of generations of hard work and care. "It's home," Zack replied simply, a note of pride in his voice. As they approached, a boy's figure came tearing out of the house. Thomas, Catherine realized with a start. She had forgotten in the chaos that Zack's nephew lived at the ranch. "Uncle Zack, Miss Catherine." Thomas called excitedly, racing toward the wagon. "Ma said you were bringing a visitor, but she didn't say it was Miss Catherine." Zack chuckled as he reined the horses to a stop in front of the house. "It was meant to be a surprise, scamp." A woman appeared on the porch, slender, dark-haired, with Thomas's eyes and a warm smile. Sarah Quinn, Catherine presumed, Zack's widowed sister-in-law. "Welcome to Quinn Ranch," she called, descending the steps to greet them. Zach sent word ahead that you needed sanctuary, though he was frustratingly vague about the details. Catherine climbed down from the wagon, suddenly nervous. "I'm so sorry to impose on your hospitality, Mrs. Quinn." "Sarah, please," the woman replied, taking Catherine's hands in her own. "And it's no imposition. Any friend of Zach's is welcome here." Her gaze flickered meaningfully between Catherine and Zach, a knowing smile touching her lips, especially one he's been talking about for weeks on end. "Sarah," Zach groaned, a rare flush coloring his tanned face as he joined them after handing the wagon reins to a ranch hand who had appeared to take care of the horses. "Oh, don't look so mortified, brother," Sarah teased. "It's about time you showed interest in a woman with more to offer than just a pretty face." Catherine felt her own cheeks warm at the implication that she was the subject of family discussions. Before she could formulate a response, the front door opened again, and an older man stepped onto the porch tall like Zach, with the same broad shoulders and direct gaze, though his hair was silver and deep lines etched his weather-beaten face. "Pa," Zach said, straightening slightly. "This is Miss Catherine Foster. Catherine, my father, James Quinn." The elder Quinn studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Miss Foster, my son says you're in need of safe harbor." "Yes, sir," Catherine replied, instinctively responding to the authority in his voice. "And I'm deeply grateful for your willingness to provide it." "Let's get inside," he said gruffly. "We can talk over supper. Sarah's made her famous beef stew, and Zach looks like he could use a good meal after the day he's had." The Quinn family home was a revelation to Catherine. Having grown up in a Boston mansion filled with expensive furnishings selected more for their ability to impress than for comfort, she was struck by the warm, lived-in quality of the ranch house. Comfortable furniture, handmade quilts, family photographs, and items collected over generations created an atmosphere of belonging that her father's house had never possessed. After being shown to a guest room where she could freshen up, Catherine joined the family for supper in a dining room dominated by a massive oak table that could easily seat 12. The meal was simple but delicious: hearty beef stew, fresh baked bread, and apple cobbler for dessert. Throughout, Thomas regaled them with stories from school, occasionally asking Catherine to confirm some detail about their lessons. It was only after the meal, when Thomas had been sent upstairs to complete his reading assignment, that the conversation turned to the reason for Catherine's presence. "Zach tells me you're running from an arranged marriage," James Quinn said, his direct approach reminiscent of his son's. Catherine nodded, gathering her courage to tell her story once again. As she related the details, her father's business dealings with Harold Whitcomb, the debt that led to her being offered as payment, her discovery of Whitcomb's cruelty toward his first wife, she watched the expressions on the faces around her change from concern to outrage. "Selling your own daughter," Sarah murmured, shaking her head in disbelief. "How could a father do such a thing?" "Easily enough when you see people as commodities rather than human beings," James replied grimly. "I've known men like your father, Miss Foster. Men who believe their wealth entitles them to disregard the basic dignity of others." "And now his agent has tracked you to Bandera," Zach added, picking up the thread of the story. "Sheriff Taylor is trying to misdirect him, but it's only a matter of time before someone recognizes Catherine from the photograph he's carrying." James Quinn leaned back in his chair, his weathered hands folded on the table before him. "You're welcome to stay here as long as necessary, Miss Foster. The Quinn Ranch has protected its own through Comanche raids, range wars, and the recent unpleasantness between the states. We can certainly handle one Boston businessman's lackey." The simple acceptance in his words brought tears to Catherine's eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn. But I can't ask your family to risk yourselves for me. If my father discovers you're harboring me, he could cause trouble for the ranch." "Let him try," James replied with a dismissive gesture. "We've been here for 3 generations, Miss Foster. Our roots run deep in this county. Your father may have money, but out here, that counts for less than character and the respect of one's neighbors." "Pa's right," Zach added, his blue eyes meeting Catherine's across the table. "Besides, you're not asking. We're offering." The conviction in his voice stirred something in Catherine's heart, a feeling of belonging she had rarely experienced. These people, who barely knew her, were willing to stand against the considerable resources of her father to protect her freedom. "I don't know what to say," she admitted softly. "Say you'll stay," Sarah suggested with a warm smile. "At least until we figure out a more permanent solution. It's been too long since we had another woman at the ranch, and Thomas adores you already." Put that way, how could she refuse? Catherine nodded, her decision made. "I'll stay, thank you." Later that evening, as the household prepared for bed, Catherine found herself on the wide front porch, wrapped in a borrowed shawl against the night chill. The stars scattered across the Texas sky seemed impossibly bright, the silence broken only by the occasional lowing of cattle in the distance and the soft chorus of night insects. She heard the front door open and close behind her, followed by Zach's familiar footsteps. He came to stand beside her at the porch railing, not touching her but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Penny for your thoughts," he said quietly. Catherine smiled at the familiar phrase. "I'm not sure they're worth that much." "I'd wager they are," Zach replied. When she remained silent, he continued, "Is it about what I said earlier? Because if that's making you uncomfortable—" "No," Catherine interrupted, turning to face him. In the silver moonlight, his features were cast in dramatic relief, his blue eyes darkened to midnight. "It's not that. It's everything. 2 months ago, I was in Boston, trapped in a life I didn't choose. Now I'm here in Texas, running from my father, putting your family at risk." "We're not exactly helpless, Catherine," Zach said with a slight smile. "The Quinns have been holding their own in Texas since before the Republic was formed." "It's not about being helpless," she replied. "It's about the fact that I've involved you in my troubles, that you and your family could suffer for helping me." Zach was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady on her face. "Do you regret coming to Bandera?" "No," Catherine answered without hesitation. "These past 2 months have been the first time in my life I've felt free, like I'm living on my own terms, not according to someone else's expectations." "Then stop worrying about what might happen," Zach said, reaching out to gently take her hand. "We'll face whatever comes together." The simple declaration and the promise it contained warmed Catherine from within. "Together," she repeated softly, allowing her fingers to curl around his. They stood in companionable silence for several minutes, hands linked, gazing out at the starlit landscape. Finally, Catherine spoke the words that had been forming in her heart since his declaration in Mrs. Jenkins' shop. "What you said earlier about falling in love with me," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond properly. Zach turned to face her fully, his expression suddenly vulnerable in a way that tugged at her heart. "You don't owe me a response, Catherine." "Yes, I do," she insisted gently. "Because the truth is, I'm falling in love with you too, Zachary Quinn, despite my best efforts not to." The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the hills. "Why were you trying not to?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Because I was afraid," Catherine admitted. "Afraid of being found. Afraid of bringing danger to the people I care about. Afraid of—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Afraid of giving someone that kind of power over me again." Understanding dawned in Zach's eyes. "I would never use love as a weapon against you, Catherine. That's not what it's meant to be." "I know that now," she replied softly. "You've shown me what real caring looks like, not as a transaction or a tool for control, but as something freely given." Zach's free hand came up to gently cup her cheek, his touch warm against her skin. "May I kiss you, Catherine Foster?" The The formal request, so respectful of her boundaries, was the final confirmation of what her heart already knew. This man was nothing like the controlling figure she had known in Boston. With Zach, she was truly free to choose. "Yes," she whispered, her eyes closing as he leaned closer. His lips met hers in a kiss that began gently, almost reverently, before deepening into something that sent warmth cascading through her entire body. Catherine found herself responding with a passion she hadn't known she possessed, her arms sliding around his neck as his encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the Founders' Day dance," he admitted with a small laugh. "Why didn't you?" Catherine asked, her fingers playing with the hair at the nape of his neck. "Because you weren't ready," he replied simply. "And some things are worth waiting for." The honest answer only increased Catherine's certainty that she had found something precious, a man who understood that true freedom meant the right to choose the timing of her own heart's surrender. Later, as Catherine prepared for bed in the guest room, she realized that for the first time since fleeing Boston, she wasn't planning her next escape. Instead, she was contemplating a future one that included the Quinn Ranch, teaching in Bandera, and most of all, the steadfast cowboy who had shown her what freedom really meant. The challenge would be ensuring that future remained possible in the face of her father's determination to reclaim her. But as she drifted towards sleep, Catherine found herself believing that with Zach and his family beside her, even that obstacle might be overcome. The days at Quinn Ranch settled into a rhythm that Catherine found unexpectedly comforting. Each morning, she rose with the household at dawn, joining the family for a hearty breakfast before the men headed out to attend to ranch work. Sarah welcomed Catherine's help with household tasks, teaching her to make bread, churn butter, and preserve the last of the fall garden's bounty. In the afternoons, Catherine took over Thomas's lessons, continuing his education despite his absence from the Bandera schoolhouse. The boy proved to be an eager student when working one-on-one, his quick mind grasping concepts that had sometimes eluded him in the larger classroom setting. "You have a gift for teaching," Sarah observed one afternoon as they watched Thomas practicing his penmanship on the porch. "He's more focused with you than I've ever seen him." "He's a bright boy," Catherine replied. "He just needs the right encouragement." Sarah's expression softened as she gazed at her son. James was the same way, according to Zach, more interested in the practical aspects of ranching than book learning. The mention of Zach's brother, Sarah's late husband, brought a shadow to the woman's eyes. Catherine had learned that James Quinn Jr. had died 2 years earlier when a horse had thrown him during a thunderstorm, leaving Sarah a widow at 28 and Thomas fatherless at 8. "You must miss him terribly," Catherine said gently. Sarah nodded, her gaze distant. "Every day. But it gets easier with time, and having Zach and Father Quinn here has been a blessing. They've made sure Thomas and I wanted for nothing." That was the kind of man Zach was. Catherine reflected one who stepped up to care for his family without hesitation, who shouldered responsibilities that weren't strictly his without complaint. The realization only deepened her growing feelings for him. Evenings at the ranch were Catherine's favorite time. After supper, the family would gather in the parlor. Sometimes James Quinn would tell stories of the early days in Texas, painting vivid pictures of a wilder time when Comanche raids were common, and the Republic of Texas was still finding its footing. Other evenings, they would read aloud from books everything from the Bible to Dickens to dime novels that made Zach groan at their inaccurate portrayal of life in the West. Through it all, Catherine was conscious of Zach's presence, his quiet strength, his occasional dry humor, the way his eyes sought hers across the room. Since their kiss on the porch, they had been careful to maintain propriety, especially in front of the family. But the connection between them had deepened. manifesting in shared glances, brief touches, and private conversations when they could steal a few moments alone. A week into Catherine's stay at the ranch, Zach rode into Bandera to check on the situation with Mr. Harrington. He returned with troubling news. "He's still there," Zach reported grimly as the family gathered in the parlor after Thomas had been sent to bed. "According to Sheriff Taylor, he's been showing your photograph all over town and offering an even larger reward, $500 for information leading to your return." Catherine's stomach clenched with renewed fear. "That's a fortune to most people in Bandera." "It is," Zach agreed. "But so far, no one's taken the bait. Sheriff Taylor says the townsfolk have closed ranks, even those who recognized you are keeping quiet." "But how long will that last?" Catherine asked, voicing the fear that had been growing within her. $500 could make a tremendous difference to a struggling family. "You underestimate the people of Bandera," James Quinn said from his armchair by the fire. "Money isn't everything, especially when weighed against doing what's right." "Pa's right," Zach added. "Besides, Harrington is making himself increasingly unwelcome. His Eastern manners and obvious disdain for the town aren't winning him any friends." Despite their reassurances, Catherine's anxiety persisted. What happens when he gives up on Bandera and starts checking nearby ranches? "It's only logical that if I'm not in town, I might be sheltering somewhere close by." The three Quinns exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "We've thought of that," Zach finally said, "which is why we've been discussing options for a more permanent solution." "What kind of options?" Catherine asked, a flicker of hope kindling within her. It was James Quinn who answered, his weathered face serious in the firelight. "Under Texas law, a married woman becomes her husband's responsibility, not her father's. Even if your father found you, he would have no legal claim on you if you were a married woman." The implication of his words hung in the air, and Catherine's gaze automatically sought Zach's. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. "Are you suggesting?" she began, unable to complete the question. "It's one option," James replied matter-of-factly. "One that would provide legal protection against your father's claims." "But marriage is," Catherine broke off, searching for words. "Marriage is a sacred commitment, not just a legal maneuver." "It certainly is," Sarah agreed softly, "which is why it would have to be a real marriage, not just a paper arrangement." Catherine's heart pounded in her chest as she absorbed the implications. A real marriage, to Zach. The idea was simultaneously terrifying and strangely appealing. "This isn't how I would have chosen to have this conversation," Zach finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "But since Pa has brought it up." He crossed the room to kneel before Catherine's chair, taking her hands in his. "Catherine Foster, I think you know how I feel about you. If you'll have me, I would be honored to call you my wife, not just to protect you from your father, but because I love you and want to build a life with you here." The simple sincerity in his words brought tears to Catherine's eyes. This wasn't the calculated proposal she would have received in Boston, carefully negotiated between families with considerations of wealth and social position. This was a man offering his heart, his name, and his protection freely given, with no expectation beyond her happiness. "Zach," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I can't let you make such a sacrifice." "It's not a sacrifice," he interrupted gently. "Not when it's what I want more than anything." "But we've known each other such a short time," Catherine protested, even as her heart leaped at his words. "What if some people court for years and never really know each other?" Sarah interjected softly. "Others recognize what they've found in just weeks. When it's right, it's right." James Quinn cleared his throat. "I'll leave you two to discuss this privately," he said, rising from his chair. "Sarah, I believe we're needed elsewhere." As the elder Quinn and Sarah discreetly left the parlor, closing the door behind them, Catherine found herself alone with Zach, his hand still holding hers, his blue eyes reflecting the dancing firelight. "You don't have to answer now," he said quietly. "I know it's sudden, and I know marriage wasn't in your plans when you fled Boston seeking freedom." "It wasn't," Catherine admitted. "After seeing what my father's marriage was like after my mother died, how he treated his second wife, I wasn't sure I ever want to marry." "I understand," Zach replied, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "And if you say no, we'll find another way to keep you safe. I promise you that." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within Catherine's soul. Here was a man offering her a choice, a real choice, with the freedom to say yes or no without fear of consequences. It was, perhaps, the most profound expression of respect she had ever received. "What would it be like," she asked softly, "being married to you?" A slow smile spread across Zach's face at the question. "Well, you'd live here at the ranch, though we could build a place of our own if you preferred. You could continue teaching, either here with Thomas or back at the school in town once the danger has passed. We'd work the ranch together, build a life, maybe have children someday if you wanted that." The picture he painted was so different from the gilded cage that would have awaited her as Harold Whitcomb's wife. No forced social engagements, no being paraded as a trophy, no fear of a husband's cruel moods. Instead, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. "And at night?" Catherine asked, a blush heating her cheeks at her own boldness. Zach's eyes darkened, but his voice remained gentle. "At night, I would hold you close and thank God for bringing you into my life. I would cherish you, Catherine, always." The simple promise, delivered with such heartfelt conviction, was the final piece that tipped the balance in her heart. Catherine knew with sudden clarity that marrying Zachary Quinn would not be surrendering her hard-won freedom, but rather embracing it fully with a man who understood its value. "Yes," she whispered, her decision made. "Yes, I will marry you, Zachary Quinn." Joy blazed across his face, and before she could say another word, he was pulling her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of promise and passion, and a future brighter than either could have imagined alone. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "We'll be married as soon as possible," he murmured, "before Harrington can cause any more trouble." Catherine nodded, her heart too full for words. She had come west seeking freedom from one marriage, only to find liberty in the promise of another, a paradox that somehow made perfect sense in the circle of Zach's arms. The next 2 days passed in a whirlwind of preparations. A message was sent to Reverend Wilson in Bandera, asking him to come to the ranch to perform the ceremony. Sarah and Catherine worked together to alter one of Sarah's better dresses, a pale blue that brought out the green in Catherine's eyes, to serve as a wedding gown. Thomas, upon being told the news, had whooped with delight at the prospect of having his beloved Miss Catherine become his official aunt. Only one shadow fell across their happiness: the continued presence of Mr. Harrington in Bandera, a reminder that Catherine's past was still pursuing her. But even that couldn't dampen the joy that seemed to permeate the ranch as the wedding day approached. On the morning of the third day, Reverend Wilson arrived, accompanied by Sheriff Taylor and, to Catherine's surprise, Mrs. Jenkins and Miss Parker from town. "You didn't think we'd miss your wedding, did you?" Mrs. Jenkins declared, embracing Catherine warmly. "When Zachary rode into town yesterday with the news, we insisted on coming." "But Mr. Harrington," Catherine began, concerned. "Is on a wild goose chase to Kerrville," Sheriff Taylor interjected with a satisfied smile. "Got word that a young woman matching your description was seen boarding a stagecoach there. Should keep him occupied for at least a day or two." Relief washed over Catherine. "Thank you, Sheriff." "Just doing my duty, madam," he replied with a tip of his hat. "Besides, I've known Zachary Quinn since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Any woman who puts that look in his eyes is worth protecting." The ceremony itself was simple but deeply moving. In the Quinn Ranch parlor, decorated with late-blooming wildflowers gathered by Thomas and Sarah, Catherine stood beside Zach before Reverend Wilson and their small circle of friends. James Quinn stood as witness. His weathered face softened with approval as he watched his son pledge his life to the woman who had come to mean so much to all of them. Catherine wore the blue dress with her mother's locket, the one precious item she had brought from Boston, and wildflowers in her hair. Zach looked handsome in his best shirt and vest, his dark hair neatly combed, his blue eyes never leaving her face as they spoke their vows. I, Zachary James Quinn, take thee, Eleanor Catherine Foster, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he said, his deep voice steady and sure. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When it was Catherine's turn, she was surprised to find her voice equally steady, her heart certain despite the circumstances that had brought them to this moment. I, Eleanor Catherine Foster, take thee, Zachary James Quinn, to be my lawfully wedded husband. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. The simple gold band that Zach slipped onto her finger had belonged to his grandmother, a family heirloom that James Quinn had presented that morning with tears in his eyes, saying his wife would have wanted Zach's bride to have it. As it settled into place, Catherine felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that transcended the practical reasons behind their hasty marriage. By the authority vested in me by the state of Texas and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Wilson declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. With a smile, he added, You may kiss your bride, Zachary. Zach's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, his hands cradling her face as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When they turned to face their small gathering of witnesses, the love and approval on the faces around them confirmed what Catherine already knew in her heart: this marriage, begun as protection, had already become something far more profound. The celebration that followed was joyful despite its small scale. Sarah and Mrs. Jenkins had prepared a feast, and even Thomas had been allowed to stay up late to celebrate. As night fell, toasts were offered, stories were told, and for a few precious hours, the threat hanging over them receded into the background. It was late when the guests finally departed, Sheriff Taylor promising to return the following day with news of Mr. Harrington's movements. Sarah had prepared the master bedroom for the newlyweds. Zach's room expanded years earlier in anticipation of him eventually taking a wife. As Catherine stood in the bedroom, now alone with her husband, a flutter of nerves took hold. Despite the genuine love between them, their courtship had been unconventional to say the least, and they were still learning each other's hearts. Catherine, Zach's voice was gentle as he closed the door behind him. We don't have to. That is, I know this marriage happened quickly. If you need time, no, she interrupted softly, turning to face him. In the warm glow of the oil lamp, his beloved face was a study in concerned tenderness. I don't need time, Zach. I need you. The words, spoken from the heart, seemed to release something in both of them. Zach crossed the room in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes. His kiss was different now, deeper, more passionate, unrestrained by the proprieties that had governed their previous encounters. What followed was a discovery of each other that Catherine would remember all her days: tender, passionate, and ultimately transformative. In Zach's gentle hands and whispered words of love, she found not the surrender of self she had feared in marriage, but a profound freedom to be fully herself, accepted and cherished for exactly who she was. Later, cradled in her husband's arms, Catherine traced idle patterns on his chest, marveling at the turn her life had taken. If someone had told me 3 months ago that I would flee Boston only to find love and marriage in Texas, I would have thought them mad, she murmured. Zach chuckled, the sound reverberating beneath her cheek. Life has a way of surprising us. When I went to meet the stage coach that day, the last thing I expected was to find my future wife stepping down from it. You think we're mad? Catherine asked, lifting her head to look into his eyes. Marrying so quickly, probably, he admitted with a grin that softened into seriousness. But sometimes, Catherine, you just know when something's right. From that first moment, there was something about you, a strength, a light that called to something in me. Everything since has only confirmed what my heart recognized immediately. The simple honesty of his words resonated with Catherine's own experience. I felt it too, she confessed. Even though I tried not to, I was so determined to be independent to need no one. And now? Zach asked, his fingers gently combing through her loose hair. Now I understand that true independence isn't about standing alone, she replied thoughtfully. It's about choosing to stand beside someone who supports your freedom rather than constrains it. Zach's arms tightened around her. That's what I want to be for you, Catherine. Not a replacement for your father's control, but a partner who helps you become more fully yourself. You already are, she whispered, pressing a kiss to his heart. As they drifted towards sleep, wrapped in each other's warmth, Catherine felt a peace she had never known before. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, whether from Mr. Harrington or her father, or simply the everyday trials of ranch life, they would face them together. Their strength multiplied by the love they had found in each other. Catherine's first full day as Mrs. Zachary Quinn began with soft morning light filtering through the bedroom curtains and her husband's tender kiss. The reality of their marriage, both its legality and its consummation, had transformed her status completely. No longer Eleanor Catherine Foster, daughter and property of Ambrose Foster. She was now Catherine Quinn, wife of Zachary Quinn, a woman with her own legal standing and protection under the law. The knowledge brought a profound sense of relief that manifested in a lightness of spirit as she dressed and joined the family for breakfast. Sarah greeted her with a knowing smile and a sisterly hug, while Thomas peppered her with questions about whether he should call her Aunt Catherine now. Just Catherine is fine, Thomas, she assured him, ruffling his hair affectionately. Nothing else needs to change. But in fact, everything had changed, not just her legal status, but the way she moved through the world. As Zach's wife, she had a place in this family, a home that was truly hers, a future built on love rather than obligation. The morning passed in a haze of domestic activity, with Catherine helping Sarah with household tasks and continuing Thomas's lessons. Zach and his father were out checking cattle in the north pasture, but Catherine felt Zach's presence even in his absence, in the wedding ring on her finger, in the pleasant soreness of her body that reminded her of their night together, in the knowledge that he would return to her at day's end. It was shortly after the midday meal when Sheriff Taylor arrived at the ranch, his expression grave as he dismounted from his horse. Sheriff James Quinn greeted him from the porch, where he'd been enjoying his pipe. You look like a man bearing bad news. I'm afraid so, Sheriff Taylor replied, removing his hat as he climbed the steps. Is Mrs. Quinn available? Both of them, I mean. Catherine and Sarah were called from the kitchen, and they all gathered in the parlor, tension thick in the air as they waited for the sheriff to speak. Harrington's back from Careville, he finally said, turning his hat in his hands. And he's not alone. Harold Whitcomb himself arrived on yesterday's train. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. Whitcomb is in Bandera, Sheriff Taylor nodded grimly. At the hotel. And he's brought legal papers, a contract of engagement signed by your father, claiming your promise to him and demanding your return. He has no legal right to her, Zach said immediately, his arm going protectively around Catherine's shoulders. She's my wife now. I explained that, the sheriff replied. Showed him the marriage certificate myself, but he's claiming the marriage isn't valid because she was already contracted to him. That's not how the law works, James Quinn growled. A woman of legal age can marry whom she chooses, regardless of her father's promises. I know that, and you know that, Sheriff Taylor agreed. But Whitcomb is threatening legal action against the town for harboring her, against Reverend Wilson for performing the ceremony, against all of you for what he's calling interference with a binding contract. Catherine's hands trembled as she absorbed this development. He won't stop, she whispered. He sees me as property that's been stolen from him. Zach's arm tightened around her. Let him make his threats. The law is on our side. Maybe so, Sheriff Taylor said cautiously, but he's got money and connections. He's already telegraphed for a lawyer from San Antonio, talking about taking the case all the way to the state's Supreme Court if necessary. And in the meantime, he'll make life difficult for everyone who helped me, Catherine concluded, her heart sinking. The very scenario she had feared was unfolding, her presence bringing trouble to the people who had shown her kindness. What does he want? James Quinn asked directly. To speak with Mrs. Quinn, the sheriff replied. Says if she'll agree to meet with him at the hotel in a public setting, with witnesses, he'll hold off on legal action until they've had a chance to resolve matters between them. Absolutely not, Zach declared immediately. I won't have my wife anywhere near that man. It might be our best option, James said thoughtfully. Buy us some time to consult with a lawyer ourselves. I'm not letting Catherine within a mile of him, Zach insisted, his voice hardening throughout this exchange. Catherine had been thinking furiously, weighing options and consequences. Finally, she spoke up, her voice steadier than she felt. I'll meet with him. Catherine, no, Zach protested, turning to face her. Listen to me, she said, placing her hand on his cheek. As long as Whitcomb is in Bandera, everyone who helped me is at risk. If meeting with him will buy us time to find a permanent legal solution, then it's worth the risk. It's too dangerous, Zach argued. You know what kind of man he is. I do, Catherine agreed. But I also know he won't try anything in a public place with witnesses present. His reputation matters too much to him. A tense silence fell as Zach struggled with the idea. Sheriff Taylor cleared his throat. For what it's worth, I'd be there the entire time, and so would Reverend Wilson. Whitcomb agreed to that condition. See, Catherine said gently, I'll be protected. I'm coming too, Zach declared, his tone brooking no argument. If my wife is meeting with this man, I'm going to be present. Sheriff Taylor looked uncomfortable. Whitcomb specifically said he wouldn't meet if Zach was there, said it would be provocative. He's afraid of Zach, James observed shrewdly. Knows he wouldn't stand a chance against him in a fair fight. Likely so, the sheriff agreed, but if we're trying to avoid confrontation. Catherine could see the struggle playing out on Zach's face, his desire to protect her warring with the practical reality of their situation. She took both his hands in hers. Zach, I need to do this, not just for us, but for everyone who's helped me. I can't have their kindness repaid with legal troubles. Then I'll wait outside, Zach compromised, his jaw set stubbornly. Close enough to intervene if needed, but not in the room to provoke him. Sheriff Taylor nodded, accepting this arrangement. The meeting is set for tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the hotel dining room. Public enough for safety, private enough for conversation. After the sheriff departed, a heavy silence fell over the Quinn household. Sarah took Thomas out riding, sensing that Zach and Catherine needed time alone to process this development. James Quinn retreated to his study, muttering about telegraphing an old friend who practiced law in San Antonio. Left alone in the parlor, Catherine turned to her husband of barely one day, her heart aching at the worry etched on his features. I'm sorry, Zach. I never wanted to bring this trouble to your door. Don't apologize, he replied, drawing her into his arms. None of this is your fault. The blame lies entirely with your father and this Whitcomb character. Catherine rested her head against his chest, drawing strength from his steady heartbeat. I'm afraid, she admitted softly. Not of meeting Whitcomb, but of what might happen afterward, if he refuses to accept our marriage. Then we'll fight him, Zach said firmly. Through legal channels if possible, by other means if necessary. I meant what I said in my vows, Catherine. You're my wife now, and I will protect you with everything I have. The fierce determination in his voice brought tears to her eyes. This was what love looked like, not ownership or control, but a partnership where each defended the other's freedom and dignity. I love you, she whispered, the words still new but deeply felt. And I love you, he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Which is why the thought of you facing Whitcomb alone terrifies me. I won't be alone, Catherine reminded him. The sheriff and Reverend Wilson will be there, and you'll be nearby. Zach sighed, his breath stirring her hair. Promise me something, anything. If you feel threatened, if he says or does anything that makes you uncomfortable, you'll leave immediately. Don't worry about being polite or proper. Just get up and walk out. I'll be right outside the door. The concern in his voice touched Catherine deeply. I promise, she said, knowing she would keep her word. That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Zach held her close, as if afraid she might disappear. Catherine nestled against him, drawing comfort from his warmth and strength, trying to banish thoughts of tomorrow's confrontation. Tell me about our future, she murmured, needing to focus on something beyond the immediate crisis. Zach's hand stroked soothingly along her spine as he spoke of his dreams expanding the ranch, perhaps building a smaller house of their own nearby for privacy while remaining close to family, the children they might have someday, the life they would build together. His voice, deep and steady in the darkness, painted pictures of a future so tangible Catherine could almost touch it. It was this future she held in her mind as she finally drifted to sleep in her husband's arms, not the looming confrontation with Harold Whitcomb, but the life waiting on the other side of it. A life of freedom, purpose, and love. The next day dawned clear and crisp, a perfect late autumn day in the Texas Hill Country. Catherine dressed with particular care for the meeting, choosing a deep burgundy dress that Sarah had loaned her, conservative enough to be respectable, elegant enough to convey confidence. She twisted her hair into a neat chignon, secured her mother's locket around her neck, and squared her shoulders before the mirror. The woman who gazed back at her was not the frightened fugitive who had stepped off the stagecoach in Bandera 2 months ago, but a woman who had found her strength and her place in the world. Zach watched her preparations with a mixture of pride and apprehension. You look beautiful, he said simply, coming to stand behind her at the mirror. And determined, Catherine added, meeting his eyes in the reflection. That too, he agreed with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his worried eyes. The ride into Bandera was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. James Quinn had insisted on coming as well, his weathered face set in lines of grim determination. Thomas had been left at the ranch with Sarah, protected from the unfolding drama. As they approached the town, Catherine felt her anxiety rising. Somewhere in that cluster of buildings waited Harold Whitcomb, the man her father had chosen for her, the man whose cruelty had driven her to flee across the country. Remember, Zach said quietly as they neared the hotel. I'll be right outside the door. If you need me, just call out, Catherine nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence beside her. When they reached the hotel, Sheriff Taylor was waiting for them on the porch, his expression grave. Mrs. Quinn, he greeted her formally, the use of her married name a pointed reminder of her changed status. Reverend Wilson is already inside. Mr. Whitcomb and his associate are waiting in the dining room. Catherine took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. I'm ready. Zach squeezed her hand one last time before releasing it, his blue eyes intense as they met hers. I love you, he said simply. I love you too, she replied, the words giving her courage. With Sheriff Taylor at her side, Catherine entered the hotel. The dining room had been cleared of other patrons, though the door remained open to the lobby where curious townsfolk pretended to have business that kept them lingering. Reverend Wilson stood near the windows, his Bible clutched in his hands as if for moral support. And there, at a table in the center of the room, sat Harold Whitcomb. He was exactly as Catherine remembered, a tall, thin man in his 50s with steel gray hair and cold eyes set in a face that might have been handsome once before ambition, and cruelty carved their lines into it. Beside him sat Mr. Harrington, looking uncomfortable as he surveyed the room. Whitcomb rose as Catherine entered, his gaze raking over her in a way that made her skin crawl despite the layers of fabric between them. Miss Foster, he said, deliberately using her maiden name. How kind of you to finally grace us with your presence. It's Mrs. Quinn now, Catherine replied, her voice steadier than she had expected. As I believe Sheriff Taylor informed you. A flicker of anger crossed Whitcomb's face before he mastered it. A technicality we'll soon address. Please sit down. Catherine took the chair opposite him, arranging her skirts with deliberate care to hide the trembling of her hands. Sheriff Taylor positioned himself directly behind her chair, a reassuring presence at her back. I must say, you've led us on quite a chase, Whitcomb continued, his tone conversational though his eyes remained cold. Your father has been beside himself with worry. I find that difficult to believe, Catherine replied. Given that his concern for my welfare was notably absent when he arranged my marriage to you without my consent. Whitcomb's mouth tightened at her directness. A daughter's duty is to obey her father's wishes. Surely your rural sojourn hasn't caused you to forget the basic principles of civilized society. On the contrary, Catherine said, gaining confidence as she spoke. My time in Texas has taught me more about civilization, true civilization based on mutual respect and human dignity, than 22 years in Boston society ever did. Charming, Whitcomb said dismissively. But let us speak plainly, Miss Foster. You are promised to me by legal contract. This hasty marriage to a cowboy is clearly invalid, given your prior commitment. That's not how the law works, Mr. Whitcomb. Sheriff Taylor interjected from behind Catherine. Miss Foster, Mrs. Quinn, is of legal age and entered into marriage of her own free will. Any prior commitment arranged without her consent has no legal standing. Whitcomb barely glanced at the sheriff. We'll let the courts decide that, I think. In the meantime, Eleanor, I suggest you consider your position carefully. Your father has disowned you for this escapade. If you persist in this charade of a marriage, you'll be cut off without a penny. No inheritance, no dowry, no access to the Foster name or connections. The threat might have terrified the Catherine of 2 months ago, but now it merely confirmed what she already knew: her father had never truly cared for her welfare, only for what she could provide in terms of business advantages. Mr. Whitcomb, she said evenly, I left Boston without a penny to my name, knowing full well what it would cost me. Do you really think the threat of disinheritance holds any power now? Perhaps not, he conceded, leaning forward slightly. But consider this your cowboy husband and his family. I understand they run quite a substantial ranch. It would be a shame if certain banking connections in San Antonio suddenly called in their loans, or if cattle buyers found reason to avoid Quinn beef. Cold fury swept through Catherine at the thinly veiled threat. Are you implying you would use my father's business connections to harm the Quinn ranch? I'm merely pointing out potential consequences, Whitcomb replied smoothly. Consequences that could be avoided if you do the sensible thing and return to Boston with me. That's enough, Sheriff Taylor cut in sharply. Threatening a local ranching family won't endear you to folks around here, Mr. Whitcomb. In fact, it might be construed as criminal intimidation. Whitcomb leaned back in his chair, his mask of civility firmly back in place. "No threats, Sheriff. Simply a business discussion between myself and my fiancé." "Your fiancé is married to another man." Reverend Wilson spoke up for the first time, his voice quiet but firm. "I performed the ceremony myself, with proper witnesses and documentation. In the eyes of God and the state of Texas, Catherine Foster is now Catherine Quinn." "A technicality that can be overcome," Whitcomb dismissed. "Especially given the circumstances." Catherine had heard enough. Rising from her chair with as much dignity as she could muster, she faced the man who had haunted her nightmares for months. "Mr. Whitcomb, let me be absolutely clear. I will never marry you. Not now, not ever. I am Zachary Quinn's wife, and I have found a home and purpose here that I would not trade for all the wealth in Boston." "You're making a grave mistake, Eleanor," Whitcomb said, his voice hardening as his mask of civility slipped. "I can make life very difficult for you and your husband. And we can make things difficult for you too," came a new voice from the doorway. Catherine turned to see Zach standing there, his tall frame silhouetted against the light from the lobby. Despite their agreement that he would wait outside, she couldn't find it in her heart to be upset at his intervention. Something in his presence seemed to shift the energy in the room, as if the balance of power had suddenly tilted. "Mr. Quinn, I presume," Whitcomb said coldly. "This is a private conversation. Between you and my wife," Zach replied, moving to stand beside Catherine. "Which makes it very much my business." Whitcomb's gaze flicked between them, and for the first time, Catherine saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Whatever he had expected, perhaps a cowering young woman desperate to avoid scandal, or a rough frontiersman easily intimidated by Eastern wealth, he clearly hadn't anticipated the united front he now faced. "Your marriage won't stand up to legal challenge," Whitcomb insisted, though with less conviction than before. "Perhaps not in Boston," Zach replied evenly, "but we're in Texas. And in Texas, a woman has the right to choose her own husband, regardless of what arrangements her father might have made without her consent." "He's right," Sheriff Taylor confirmed. "Any judge in this county would uphold the marriage, especially given the circumstances of how Miss Foster came to flee Boston." "Circumstances?" Whitcomb's eyes narrowed. "What precisely are you implying?" It was Catherine who answered, her voice steady and clear in the suddenly silent room. "They know about your first wife, Mr. Whitcomb, how she died, the rumors that it wasn't an accident." All color drained from Whitcomb's face. "That's slander," he hissed. "My wife's death was a tragic accident, as the coroner confirmed." "Perhaps," Catherine replied. "But how would your business associates in Boston react if those rumors were to circulate more widely? If your next potential bride's family were to hear whispers about the fate of your first wife?" It was a bluff. Catherine had no intention of spreading rumors, even about a man as despicable as Harold Whitcomb. But she could see from his expression that the threat had found its mark. His carefully cultivated reputation was his most valuable asset in Boston society. "You wouldn't dare," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "I would prefer not to," Catherine replied truthfully. "I have no desire to revisit the past or to cause pain to anyone. All I want is to be left in peace to live the life I have chosen." A tense silence filled the room as Whitcomb visibly calculated his options. Finally, he spoke, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "And if I were to withdraw my claim on you, what guarantees do I have that these rumors won't follow me back to Boston?" "You have my word," Catherine said simply. "If you leave Bandera today and never attempt to contact me again, what I know about your first wife's death will remain private knowledge." Whitcomb studied her face, perhaps searching for signs of deception. Whatever he saw there must have convinced him, for he finally gave a curt nod. "Very well. It seems I have underestimated you, Eleanor. Your father did as well. My name is Catherine Quinn, she corrected him gently but firmly. And yes, you both did. Rising from his chair with as much dignity as he could muster, Whitcomb adjusted his expensive suit jacket. Mr. Harrington, I believe we have a train to catch. There's nothing further for us in this backwater. As Whitcomb and Harrington departed, Catherine felt Zach's arm slip around her waist, supporting her as the tension that had held her upright suddenly drained away. You were magnificent, he murmured against her hair. Is it over? She asked, hardly daring to believe it could be so simple. I believe it is, Sheriff Taylor said, relief evident in his voice. Men like Whitcomb care about one thing above all else, their reputation. You found the perfect leverage. And if he doesn't keep his word, Catherine worried, if he decides to pursue legal action anyway, then we'll face it together, Zach assured her. But my guess is he's already calculating how to explain his return to Boston without you. His pride won't let him admit defeat, which means he'll have to concoct some story about why he no longer wishes to marry you. Which serves our purposes perfectly, Reverend Wilson added with a small smile. If he claims the decision was his, he can hardly continue pursuing you legally without contradicting himself. The truth of this observation struck Catherine forcefully. In his attempt to save face, Whitcomb would effectively be relinquishing his claim on her. So it really is over, she whispered, the full weight of her freedom finally settling upon her. It's over, Zach confirmed, turning her to face him. And our life together is just beginning. In that moment, surrounded by the people who had become her champions and protectors, with her husband's loving gaze upon her face, Catherine felt the last shadows of fear dissolve. She had fled an arranged marriage and found refuge with a cowboy who understood freedom, not just the absence of constraint, but the positive liberty to choose one's own path, to build a life based on love rather than obligation. As Zach led her from the hotel into the bright Texas sunshine, the future stretched before them like the vast horizon open, promising, and theirs to shape together. Epilogue 5 years later, the spring afternoon was warm as Catherine Quinn sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching her 3-year-old daughter Elizabeth chase butterflies in the garden. Nearby, James Quinn, S.R., dozed in his rocking chair, his weathered face peaceful in slumber, a book of Texas history open on his lap. "Mama, look," Elizabeth called, her dark curls so like her father's bouncing as she pointed excitedly at a particularly vibrant monarch butterfly. "It's orange like Uncle Thomas's new horse." "It certainly is," Catherine agreed with a smile, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly where their second child, a son, Zach was convinced would make his appearance in about 2 months. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention to the road, where 3 riders appeared, Zach in the lead, followed by Thomas, now 15 and nearly as tall as his uncle, and Sarah, who had remarried 2 years earlier to the town's doctor but remained a beloved part of their extended family. Catherine's heart still quickened at the sight of her husband, even after 5 years of marriage. Zach dismounted with the easy grace that had first caught her attention that day at the stagecoach, lifting his hat to wipe his brow before catching sight of her on the porch. His face lit with a smile that was for her alone. "Papa," Elizabeth squealed, abandoning her butterflies to race toward her father. Zach caught her up in his arms, swinging her high before settling her on his hip as he walked toward the house. "How are my girls today?" he called, his blue eyes moving from his daughter to his wife with equal adoration. "We're wonderful," Catherine replied, struggling slightly to rise from her chair with her advanced pregnancy. "Your son, however, has been practicing his kicking all afternoon." Zach's grin widened as he climbed the porch steps, leaning down to kiss her tenderly before placing his free hand on her rounded belly. "That's my boy, strong like his pa, and stubborn like his ma," James Quinn, S.R., added, awakening from his doze with a chuckle. "How was town?" "Busy," Zach replied, setting Elizabeth down so she could run to greet Thomas and Sarah. The cattle drive leaves next week, and everyone's making last-minute preparations. Catherine nodded, a familiar twinge of anxiety coursing through her at the mention of the drive. Each year, Zach led the Quinn Ranch hands north to Kansas with their cattle, a journey that kept him away for nearly 2 months. Though she had grown accustomed to these separations, she never quite got used to them. "I have news," Zach continued, taking her hand and guiding her back to her chair before settling beside her. "A letter came for you from Boston." Catherine's eyebrows rose in surprise. It had been years since she had received communication from her former home. After Harold Whitcomb's departure from Bandera, there had been one terse letter from her father, essentially confirming her disinheritance. She had replied with a brief note informing him of her marriage and expressing hope for reconciliation someday, but there had been no response from my father. She asked, uncertainty coloring her voice. Zach shook his head, reaching into his vest pocket to produce an envelope. "From your stepmother, actually. Mrs. Victoria Foster." Catherine accepted the letter with surprise. Her relationship with her father's second wife had been cordial but distant. "I wonder what she wants after all this time." Opening the envelope, Catherine unfolded the single sheet of expensive stationery covered in elegant handwriting. As she read, her expression changed from puzzlement to shock. "Catherine." Zach prompted gently when she remained silent after finishing the letter. "What is it?" "My father is dead," she said, her voice strangely hollow. "A heart attack 3 weeks ago." Zach's hand covered hers, warm and reassuring. "I'm sorry," he said simply, understanding the complex emotion such news would evoke. Catherine nodded, still processing. "Victoria writes that. Despite everything, he named me in his will. Not as his primary heir, that's Victoria's son from her first marriage, but he left me a significant portion of his business holdings and our summer house in Newport." She looked up, meeting Zach's concerned gaze. "She says he spoke of me near the end, that he expressed regret for his actions." "Do you believe that?" Zach asked gently. "I don't know," Catherine admitted. "Part of me wants to, but it doesn't change what he did," Zach finished for her, understanding as always. "You don't have to decide how you feel about it right now." Catherine nodded, folding the letter carefully and returning it to its envelope. "Victoria asks if I would consider visiting Boston to settle the estate matters and to allow her to meet her grandchildren." Zach's eyebrows rose at that. "Would you want to go?" Catherine gazed out at the ranch that had become her home at Elizabeth, playing with Thomas, at the distant cattle grazing on the lush spring grass, at the hills that marked the boundaries of Quinland. Then she looked at her husband, his beloved face concerned yet supportive as always. "No," she said finally, certainty settling over her. "This is my home now, our home. If Victoria wishes to meet her grandchildren, she is welcome to visit us here." Relief flickered across Zach's face, though he tried to hide it. "You're sure? It's a significant inheritance." "Which we don't need," Catherine replied simply. "The ranch is thriving. The new breeding stock you purchased last year is already showing promise, and we're expanding the operations every season." She placed her hand over his. "I didn't flee Boston for money, Zach. I fled for freedom. And I found that here with you." Zach's smile was tender as he lifted her hand to his lips. "Every day I thank God you stepped off that stagecoach in Bandera." "As do I," Catherine replied softly. "Though I must admit, I never expected the handsome cowboy who offered to carry my bag would end up carrying my heart instead." Zach laughed, the sound still able to warm her from within after all these years. "Catherine Quinn, you've been reading too many of those romance novels Mrs. Jenkins keeps sending from town." "Perhaps," she admitted with a smile, "but the reality has proven far better than any novel." As the Texas sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Catherine leaned against her husband's shoulder, watching their daughter play in the yard of the home they had built together. The journey that had begun with her desperate flight from an arranged marriage had led her to this moment of profound contentment surrounded by love, secure in her freedom, certain of her place in the world. Freedom, she had discovered, wasn't just about escaping something bad. It was about finding something good, a place to belong, people to love, a purpose that filled one's days with meaning. And in Zachary Quinn, she had found a partner who understood that freedom wasn't the absence of commitment, but its fullest expression, the liberty to choose one's own path and to walk it hand in hand with those who matter most. As if reading her thoughts, Zach pressed a kiss to her temple. "Happy," he murmured. "Completely," Catherine replied, and meant it with her whole heart. The sun dipped below the distant hills, another day ending in the life they had built together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys, the imminent birth of their second child, the upcoming cattle drive, decisions about the unexpected inheritance from Boston, but Catherine faced the future without fear. She had fled an arranged marriage and found refuge with a cowboy who understood freedom. And in that refuge, she had discovered not just safety, but the truest form of liberty, the freedom to love and be loved, completely and without reservation. It was, Catherine reflected as Zach's arm tightened around her shoulders, the most precious freedom of all.